This is a Renew original recording. Hello and welcome to the Believe in People podcast. My name is Matthew Butler and I'm your host, or as I like to say, your facilitator. Today we're with Robbie Ince, a comedian, writer, actor and podcast veteran. He is most recognised for co-hosting the critically acclaimed BBC radio show The Infinite Monkey Cage alongside Professor Brian Cox. Beyond his engaging science shows, Robin has established himself as a prominent figure in the world of stand-up comedy. His latest book, Bibliomaniac, an obsessive tour of the bookshops of Britain, offers readers a delightful and insightful journey into the world of bookshops and the passionate quest for knowledge through the written word. Beyond his creative endeavours, Robin is known for his candid discussions on topics ranging from homelessness, addiction, technology and societal stigmas, making him an engaging and thought-provoking voice in the world of entertainment and intellectual discourse. Would you first introduce yourself, please?
My name's Robin Ince. I sometimes write books and I spend a lot of time travelling around the UK and beyond doing shows, sometimes about science, sometimes about Moomins. I'm very much... I was doing a gig the other day. It was Camp Wildfire Festival and I had my mate Trent with me and someone thought he was kind of in charge of me and just went up and they went, what's Robin talking about today? And he went, I have no idea. And I can tell you that he has no idea at this current time. But in 2 minutes' time, when he's behind the mic, something will start.
Yeah, brilliant. That's brilliant. Obviously, my producer's done so much research for this podcast, and I've got here that you mention your experiences with niche podcasts and the enjoyment of engaging in fun conversations. So, with that in mind, Robin, I'm curious. How are you feeling today, and is there anything in particular occupying your thoughts at the moment?
Do you know what? There's always something occupying my thoughts, and it was we were talking about this when I just arrived at the station, which I always love getting to Hull Station because one, you go past Humber Bridge, and I love the Humber Bridge, and then you see the Philip Larkin statue, and then you see the blue plaques for Mick Ronson, and the other Spiders from Mars as well, and such a great Bowie album and Ronson album really. So I've but one of the things that was occupying my mind was I was thinking, because I had to get up at 6 a.m. and I've gone from Manchester to Hull, and then tonight I go to the edge of Scotland, and that's going to take about 5 hours. I had momentarily thinking, why am I doing this? And then I realised that I'm in a position where I can say yes to things, that it's not about finance, that as long as I've got a certain number of jobs in the year, then I can make enough money to do things for free. And so I've been thinking a lot about the freedom that comes with being able to not be in a constant state of anxiety about money. And I think that's an incredible freedom to have. So absolutely. Almost every job that I say yes to is something that I want to do. So the ones that are about money, I'll go, if I get offered an advert or something like that, I can say no to it. Because I know the comedian Arthur Smith once said, the perfect amount of money is you can go to a bookshop and buy the books you want. You can go to the pub and drink what you want, and you can hopefully get a cab home. And I think that kind of thing that says that's a level of freedom, but then the moment you go, I'm now so rich, I'm going to have a second home. And from what I can gather, a lot of people with second homes, third homes, fourth homes, fifth homes, what they do is they spend all the time in the home they're living in worrying about what's happening to their other luxury accommodation. So I think, there's a level, as I look at the government that we have at the moment, and I think about how, I saw today there was a thing from Jeremy Hunt saying we can't give any tax cuts at the moment. I'm thinking, why do we want tax cuts? Why do the tax is okay? I don't want tax cuts. I want a society where people are happier, where the largest number of people are as happy as they can be, and that people are not angry and unkind and all of those. That to me, and yet this definition of money, and I think if you have, and I know that I'm in a very rare position to have that luxury of one, having enough money that I don't have to worry about, if I go to the supermarket. I mean, I still do. I look and I go, I'm not paying that for crumpets, but that kind of, but not having that worry. Yeah. And I think if we found that place where more people went, it's not about having more money. Once you've got security, that should feel enormous. And then we were talking again when we were walking up here about the fact that, sometimes I've been in rooms with people with lots of money, and all they talk about is lots of things that cost lots of money. So it becomes a definition of who you are. And then that becomes, I think, another chain to be kind of, tied by.
More money, more problems, by the sounds of it, yeah. Do you know what? I spoke to one of our service users, and I remember had recently been homeless, got himself in sort of, accommodation, had got himself drug-free, was participating in an aftercare programme. And I remember chatting to him, and he was like, you think you've got freedom? He said, you ain't got freedom. He said, I've got freedom. He said, you've got bills to pay. He said, I have bills to pay. He said, I wake up every morning and think, what is my day going to consist of? He said, you've got your nice car over there. He said, how much are you paying for that a month? He said, then you've got to pay your petrol. He said, you've got your rent and all this. And he went on this massive rant. I was like, God, he's right. He's got it down. And I went, so where do you actually live then? He went, I live with my mum. She pays for everything. I was like, oh, nice,
Yeah.
there we go. So there's always a caveat to it. But up until that moment, I was like, this guy's got it all worked out.
Yeah. That bit of freedom of how much freedom you can have.
Yeah. Well, this is it. I think in terms of the job that, where now we're working in a charity, for the skills that I look at my producer, for as talented as he is, could be earning a lot more money. But what we were saying is we've got so much freedom for our work. We get to do things like this. Yeah. I left the office this morning, they're all there typing on the computers, and I'm like, yeah, look what we get to go and do.
Yeah.
We get to go and have these really interesting conversations with really interesting people. And I think that in itself we've got security, and then the rest of it is fun.
Well, that's the bit where I think, because last year I did this huge tour with Brian Cox, so we played like kind of arenas and stuff like that. In fact, did a couple of nights in the Hull Arena. And that to me, in fact, there was this is a very Hull thing. This is one of the many reasons I love Hull, right? This was not long after the Queen had died, right? So it meant that every night would start with a great bit on the huge screen we had, the Queen, 1926 to whatever it was, And every night the audience would go, oh, the Queen, like that. And I felt there was a pressure as well, right? The first time no one did, second night in Hull. First night in Hull, yeah. Second night was like, no, it's gone on for ages. No, too long. And I loved that.
I thought he was going to say she got booed or something.
No, it was just like, no. And I could hear the sound man going and then going, oh, what?
Yeah,
no, that's not good.
Okay, yeah.
No, it's like 10 days ago. No. And that just...
No, I completely get it. It did, to be fair, it did feel like it went that, what was it called? State of mourning or something?
Oh, God. My dad, who was quite upset when the Queen died, because he was like, he was born in 1930, and that's a long period of time, and he was... But by day 2... he was going, this is ridiculous. When are they putting Antiques Road Trip back on? I'm having to watch this car drive around all the time. Nonsense. So even people who genuinely felt emotionally attached were, I think, blackmailed into going, no, keep mourning.
Well, because obviously we haven't lived through it ourselves. I remember, obviously, the Queen died, and my wife seemed to think that we was going to be putting the crown on Charles within 7 days or something. So when's it? I was like, no, it's not until next year. She was like, why that long? Thought it was all going to be happening within the next 7 days. I was like, no, it's quite a long process that we've got here.
Yeah, this slow trudge.
So you tweeted last night that you possibly performed your last stand-up gig of the year. You've done the Weapons of Empathy, Bibliomaniac. Have I said that right? Bibliomaniac, Infinite Monkey Cage, They've Made Us. Are you Britain's hardest working and most travelled writer and comedian?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not far off, I reckon. I reckon the miles that I do in a year are... I don't often say no to things. And again, like I was saying before, it's all things. But I just really like... I've got a very short attention span, so I always have to have something new immediately. So, I've still got, after this, even though that was the last long solo show, I've still got about 30 book festivals to do and a bunch of bookshops and libraries to go to and various other events and recordings. But immediately now I'm writing a book at the moment, and then I need to start working out, hopefully I'm going to get another series of the radio show that I do with my mate Carl. And so I just always need something happening. So sometimes I'll be really tired and I will have a moment where I go, oh, it'd be nice just to have a break. And then after an hour I go, that is so boring. And I think that's common of a lot of the people that I know, which is it's not a retreat into busyness. It's not like a kind of fear of not, it is, you just like your brain working the whole time. And that's, again, one of the reasons that I love travelling, is because every town and city you go to, and like you were saying as well, that chance to sit down with people. Like I was doing a book festival in Melrose, the borders of Scotland. And the woman who was interviewing me, she said at one point, she went, in your book, you write about the fact that sometimes you get lifts with members of your audience. Isn't that scary? And the first thing I said to her was, if you've read the history of light entertainment, you'll know that the green room is a far more frightening place than hanging out with the audience. We won't go through many, but we know the stories and we know that. But the other thing is, that's where it's really, I love the fact that when I'm playing small gigs, I get to know, like when I'm playing Penzance or something like that, the same people, they come back every year because a lot of comics don't go down and play Cornwall. And so they'll be like giving me the news. Oh, you remember last time? And this guy, well, he's got married, doesn't live down here anymore. And that person's died. And that's why, and all this stuff. And getting those lifts are not scary things. And again, like you said, those conversations you have, like there's people, members of my audience that I've become friends with, like Natalie K. Thatcher, who did the illustrations for Bibliomaniac. I met her in the audience. That was it. After a gig, we got chatting. She was interested in science and she was a really good artist. Then years later, from just a friendly conversation, I went, do you want to illustrate the book? I'd love you to do that. And my mate John Ottaway, he was like, there's loads of different things, which I think, just kind of... Was that the question of something?
Honestly, it was just about how travelled and how hard working you are, but obviously...
But I don't... But it's not... I mean, that's the thing, which is it really doesn't feel like... So the travel can feel like work. Like yesterday, going from Birmingham to Manchester on a really packed train, really feeling the collapse of the infrastructure in the United Kingdom. Yeah. That bit is the work. But standing up in front of people and showing off is not work.
Do you ever get nervous or anxious before you perform?
Not often. No. I used to. And I used to have anxiety the whole time. It was basically when I got diagnosed by an autistic stranger called Jamie, and he diagnosed me with ADHD. And from that point onwards, at the age of 52, everything fell into place, which was like a really, so I would always be worried about, like this conversation now, the moment afterwards, I think, why was I saying all that stuff? And that was a load of rubbish, and they're really angry about it, and blah, 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 blah. And that was going on every single Infinite Monkey Cage that I made. If you could have heard my inner monologue, you would have heard me going, why'd you say that? Oh, everyone just wants to listen to Brian Cox. Oh no, you've ruined that bit. Oh, that wasn't funny enough. That was going on the whole time. And then just walking around. And that's now gone. Yeah. I still, every now and again, I'll get a bit of it and I'll go, oh my God, how did I live that length of time? Like I walked into, I went to an exhibition in London with my wife and my son, and we were sitting for a coffee afterwards, and I just went, I've just realised all of the experiences that I've not had, all of the anxiety that I would have gone through from the moment I woke up and thought, did I do anything wrong yesterday? Was I argumentative? Was I blah, blah, blah? And then the first bit of getting on the train is that person looking at me because they're going, who's that? That guy looks like an idiot. And all of those, every little thing, I've definitely got the right ticket, haven't I? I've got the right ticket. And that was perpetual. And then once that went, that is like doing the arena tour, playing the O2, 14,000 people. And just having a chat to the guy at the side of the stage who works with Judas Priest, just talking about Rob Halford and things like that. And then, oh God, that's my cue. Hi, Brian, and showing off to the max and improvising and then wandering back off and going, oh, so it was Austin, was it? Where and that's... And then, but I haven't lost. The interesting thing is, I used to think if you lost the anxiety, then would you not put the effort in? But that's not, it doesn't change. I still, my desire for people, in fact, it's probably increased. I really want everyone who comes to any show that I do to leave it with a greater sense of kind of love and excitement, because I think there's a lot of comedy out there which punches down all the time. And you'll get people going, yeah, but that's what comedy is. Comedy is this kind of really, you're negative and angry and blah. And I think, no, it doesn't have to be. You can have a really amazing time and have a lot of fun where someone is on stage celebrating. It can sometimes be a bit harder because the easiest thing to do is to make fun of the person in the front row. That's it's a bit like when I was doing a gig at a primary school about the joy of science. And that did worry me. That kind of gig will, because I'm like, I really want these 5-year-olds to, and their minds are so different. And will I be successful doing this? And this science communicator had said to me, oh, don't worry about 5-year-olds. They're easy. You just talk about farting in space and dinosaur poo. And then I thought, that's really underestimating an audience of 5-year-olds. Yeah. That's the simplest thing to do, is to talk about farts and poos with them. And instead, I talked about the brain. I showed them a picture of my brain because I'd had a brain scan, talked about their brains. And then suddenly we were off. And we were talking about, the size of the universe, the number of stars in the galaxy. I showed them pictures of Jane Goodall with chimpanzees and all of this stuff. And I overran by 20 minutes, and it was only a 20-minute talk. I checked with the teacher, so they went, yeah. And we had so much fun, because that's the other thing as well, which is I think there's such an underestimation of an audience. Yeah. There is, I think people are much more, far more curious. They will go, if you start off somewhere where they're not expecting, they'll kind of go, okay, So, like one of the shows I was doing at the Edinburgh Fringe this year started with me. I was just sat on stage while the audience came in, drawing a picture of Vernon Kay's face on a watermelon, or sometimes a Galia melon, or whatever melons have been available on the way there. And then when the music ended, I would suddenly stand up, scream some things about Vernon Kay, start singing Mustang Sally, and then repeatedly punch the melon until it exploded. And then it would go blackout. I'd say blackout, and then blackout I'd go. So that's how my first Edinburgh solo show used to end. And it was quite divisive. And from that point onwards, audiences, especially if they knew me from Radio 4 or something, they were like, I don't know what this is. Yeah. But now I don't know what it is. Okay, what happens next? Yeah. And I mean, even on the last night, I overheard a woman as I was punching the melon going, are you sure we've come to the right show? And I thought, yeah, I still got it. And that bit of going, because I used to always think, is that okay? Is that enough of a joke? Yeah. Is that the right? And once you go, well, let's just make something and not listen to the critical voice, it just frees you up amazingly. So I get I genuinely, like last night, standing at the side of the stage and I'm just chatting away to the crew, and then they say, oh, you're on now, and I walk on and I just start talking and see where it goes.
Was it the diagnosis of ADHD that made all that go away then? Or what sort of caused it to just
such
disappear?
A weird thing. I cannot understand why a stranger saying, you do know this is how your mind works. Even though, of course, I'd read loads about that because I've done shows and written books about neuroscience, stuff like that. Somehow that stranger, this guy Jamie and Lyon, well worth listening to his podcast, which does a lot of stuff on neurodiversity. It just, everything, it's like a cliche to say, it's like the perfect game of Tetris. Yeah. Everything went thump, 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 thump. And after all those years, suddenly my mind just went, oh yeah, that's why people have been coming back to your shows. Not because you will often walk on stage and at the end of the gig, you'll think, oh, I didn't do the show that was in my head. And forget that no one in the audience knew the show in your head. And it doesn't matter how much laughter or applause there was, you felt, oh, I've let them down. Yeah. And that wasn't like a proper comedy show's meant to be.
Yeah, I proper get that because, to be fair, I've never really spoke about it on this podcast, but my other life is professional wrestling. So when we do professional wrestling matches, we plan small parts of the match and go out there. But obviously, kind of what you were saying, we always treat the audience as if they're stupid as well. But when we do parts of the match, it could be, oh, we forgot to do that part where I jump over the top rope and hit you with a close sort of thing. And we think everybody knows. And we come back and we'll be beating ourselves like, oh, we fucked up, we missed this part. And then you have this second where you go, actually, nobody knows. Nobody knows that we said we was going to do all that bad because they think we're not friends, that we're enemies and da-da-da-da-da. They don't get that. So when you go out there and you do it, and they don't know that you've forgotten. I imagine it's the same with comedy. They won't know.
Do you know what? I love wrestling. I love the theatre. No, I really, I'd find. I wrote a movie about wrestling, and unfortunately with my mate Darren, and we could never get enough finance for it. It was such a pity, but it was so much fun to go back through all this archive footage of, like, especially some of the American wrestlers who came over to Australia in the early 1970s, and they're doing those early versions of "I'm coming for you," and I'm gonna, and you can see that they can't read the board that's being held up, and it's just, and watching, I find it such an interesting thing.
It's changed so much. I always say it's a really interesting form of theatre. I met with, I've shared this story with Robbie before, but I met with our, with Diversity, the dance troupe, on when we was working Butlins, and they couldn't get their head around the fact that we don't rehearse. We have a little conversation and then we go out and do it. Well, they will rehearse all day, putting all this choreography together, they'll rehearse, and then they go out and do it. And they just couldn't believe that we don't rehearse. We literally talk about it, go out there, and we do it. I think that's one of the things it's been a really interesting form of theatre because there is so much drama to it, because there is so much story to it. And it's just not rehearsed. It's a conversation. It goes on, and then we play it out. We play the story out in front of people. And that's what I think people don't often get about wrestling, is that it is a story. Yeah. That's what we're telling. It isn't just two guys hitting each other with elbow drops off the top rope. We build a story up. So you've got the audience in the palm of your hand reacting to everything that you do. And I imagine, again, going back to comedy, there must be some links with that.
Well, that's certainly my approach. My approach is I don't ever want anyone to see exactly the same show. No. So there was a friend of mine, Mick, who sadly died last year. And Mick, I first got to know him because he had a kind of slightly gothic look and he had a wide-brimmed hat. So I'd always see him in the audience because I'd see the hat. And he used to come to every gig that I did in the northwest of England. And eventually I went up to him in the bar one day. I said, Mick, and he went, yeah. I said, stop paying to come to my gigs. I said, I'm on Facebook. You just tell me which ones. He said, no, I'm always going to pay. I said, but you've seen this show 9 times. He said, it's never the same. I said, are you sure? He went, it really isn't. And sometimes I'd come off and I think, I wonder if that was the same. And you go, no, you didn't do that bit, you didn't say that, that's all new. And that is what I love, which is that bit, which I presume is a similar thing, which is you get a level of instinct which says, I'm going to trust that what we create here and the way this happens is going to work. And that level of trust, whether it's a trust with someone else or whether it's a trust of your own mind. And there was a thing that I loved. Andy Warhol said in his book of philosophy, he said, I don't really like watching professional entertainers because I know they know what they're doing. And that really rung a bell, because when I watch certain comics, I think this is very well done, but I know that you said the same thing yesterday and the day before and the day before that. And when I watch someone that I think I can see the instinct there, I can see that they also don't know. It's so exciting to suddenly, briefly, your brain goes, what are you talking about? I don't know where the hell this bit is. Or when you come off stage and someone says, oh, I love that bit. And I go, that wasn't me. They went, it was. What, just now? Yeah. I don't remember saying that. It's like, you go off on an improvisation or whatever it is. And that, to me, that's proper interaction.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's it. It's going back to wrestling. We have to listen to our audience when the good guy is getting beaten up by the bad guy. Once the crowd starts clapping and that's the time for the good guy to start fighting back. And we always say the audience are dictating what is kind of going on in the ring. When they're up, that's when the good guy's up. When they're down, that's when the bad guy's down. But we do that without them even realising. I always think that's like the impressive thing for audience interaction. I mean, talking about your career, you've had such a diverse career covering a wide range of thought-provoking topics, from assisted dying to mental health and addiction services. Your openness about your ADHD diagnosis has been inspiration to many. Can you take a moment to share how your ADHD has influenced your career, both creatively and personally? And for those listeners who may not fully understand what living with ADHD is like, could you share an anecdote or describe what it feels like in a way that might resonate with them?
Well, do you know what? I'll use an example of Hull. When I was here and I went to play, Wrecking Ball, which is, record shop and also publishes great books, Drunken Bakers and all Barney Farmer stuff is amazing. I arrived, I can't remember where I'd been playing in the afternoon, and I got to Hull and I said I'd get there at 6:30. I wasn't on till 8 or whatever. But I suddenly thought, oh God, I've got to get something to eat because I'm not eating all day. So I sent the guy a text just saying, I probably won't be there at 6:30. I might be there about 7 o'clock. And he sent me back a text, just said, okay. So that would be okay. Okay. But what I saw was, okay. So you can see in even just 2 letters, you can see that you've disappointed someone and your imagination will straight away go to, I've let everyone down, I've done that. So that would be, for instance, one of the examples. Another example is, in one way it's performance enhancing, an inability to follow a line of thought. So the moment you start one sentence, it makes a connection with another idea and then another connection and then another connection. So suddenly there's just the whole brain is lit up. And of course, for anyone, I'm lucky because that's actually part of what I do. Yeah. But if you've got a job where the parameters are a lot more narrow and you're finding it hard to, because suddenly you've thought of something else. A typical thing, like just for normal things that I do, is yesterday morning I woke up and I realised I had to answer an email from a bookshop. So I opened my email and, of course, there was another email there and I then dealt with that and that led to something else. And then I suddenly realised that made me think of a writing thing. And then at lunchtime I went, I've not replied to that bookshop. I must go. So I just opened my email. But hang on a minute, that was another email. So that. And then last night at 1 a.m, I went, I've still not answered that bookshop. And that was the one moment where I think I was tired enough that I was able to keep concentrating and going, that's it. You're answering Blackwell's Oxford email about doing a gig on Halloween. You've done it now. Yeah. But sometimes that can take weeks. Also, paranoia on phone calls, for instance. A lot of people I know with ADHD find it very, very difficult to ring people. And that's certainly something when I was doing stand-up, and you had to ring clubs and clubs would say, ring us on Tuesday, we'll give you a gig. And I wouldn't be able to do that for 6 months. Every day I'd wake up and go, today's the day I'm going to ring. No, I'm not. And the negative thoughts, generally that negative thought thing is a very, I did this 26-hour live online show just after lockdown. It was a Christmas show with loads of scientists and musicians. It was like Robert Smith did it from The Cure, and we had Tim Minch in there and Helen Sharman, the astronaut, and all this stuff. And at the end of it, I remember 2 p.m, just sitting there going, that was good. And with my mate Trent, we were like, yeah, we did well. And then I got home and my wife and son were like, hey. And then about 10 minutes after I got home, my wife just went, why'd you put that there? And that was it. For 3 months, it was like suicide ideation and all of those things. So it's that's the negative side of it. And for a lot of people who have no escape from that negativity, and it is that whole thing of masking so much of who we are. Like one thing that I do now is quite often, because I've spoken about neurodiversity, people will come up to me after gigs and they'll tell me a story. And they'll get really, the kind of, and I can see the ADHD thing, or sometimes it's a story about autism and late diagnosis of that, whatever it might be. And now what I always say to them afterwards is, just so you know, I know that when you leave here now, when you leave this bar, you're going to go, why don't I go and tell him all those things? He must think I'm an absolute idiot. I can't believe it. I said, I know you're going to think that, more than likely, because that's exactly what I always did for the majority of my life. So just so you know, I don't think you're an idiot. I'm glad you told me the story. You didn't waste my time. And just take that away. So that's what, and I know you might now still say, yeah, I know he said all those things, and it's that bit of, I think, of trying to be able to be honest and say, these are my experiences, my internal experiences, and I think they might be yours too. And if they are, just so you know, I'm happy you spoke. So, and now it is a predominantly positive thing. Yeah. And it's like when you lose you don't realise how energy sapping anxiety is until you get escape from it, and suddenly you go, oh my God, that was taking up so much of my mental space. That was taking up so many times when I could be having ideas and creating things. I was just worried. And the weight of it does feel like when you lose it, it's like, I've been wearing this really heavy, horrible old horsehair coat that's been itchy and scratchy, and it's just agonising, but I didn't know. And now, sometimes when there was a woman I met the other day, she was in her early 60s, and she'd had late diagnosis autism. And though I'd never met her before, I could tell that she was taller than she was before. You could see there was a lightness that was like, now I know. And I still think, even though you'll see lots of naysayers in the press and stuff about a lot of mental health stuff, but I've spoken to a lot of mental health experts, and actually in the UK, we're still way behind. And there's just so many people out there. A lot of things, and some people listening or watching this is that I think one of the problems is that the parameters, again, of what is considered to be normal and socially acceptable is way too thin. And lots of things which are currently a diagnosis in a truly healthy society wouldn't even be a diagnosis, because all of those people who are seen as eccentric and strange, and a lot of those eccentric and strange people are also the reason that we have so much art, we have so much creativity, that we have scientific understanding of so many things. That comes from people who are going through the world and going, this isn't quite right, there's something wrong here. So that starting point is very often that your mind is not in the same place as people who are, at least, from outwardly behaving in a normal manner, and perhaps inwardly have believed that they have a normal kind of way of their brain. I know some people who sometimes go, so you're thinking all the time. I go, yeah. Don't you have any quiet periods? I go, no. And I've never learnt to drive because I think I'd be rubbish at it, because I'd be thinking about too many other things. So yeah, I think in a healthy world but it has been it's really, I genuinely, when you get people coming up to you and having trust in you, and this couple came up to me and they said, oh, can I just tell you a quick story? I said, I'll tell you what, wait till I finish signing, because then we can just sit down and we can chat. And they'd recently lost a baby, so very close to it turned out that the baby wouldn't survive if born, and it was but she had to go through the birth.
Oh, Christ.
And what happened was that they found out in the scan that the baby now had one of its arms behind the back, which is a really difficult birth, and there's a lot of problems with that, and there's no particular technique tool apparently that's very effective. But one of the obstetricians I've seen this, said, I was based out in, I can't remember where it was, Ghana or Nigeria or something like that, said there they've got a technique for this. They've got this kind of way that they've got this kind of, it's literally like taking a very thin piece of rubber piping, and you kind of make a lasso, and you get in there and you manage to pull the arm round. And then once that's happened, it makes everything much easier and less dangerous both for the mother and the child. So they got a couple of other people who went, do you know that? Yeah, I've heard about this method as well. And they managed to do it. And so she lost her baby, but what she hopes is that now more people are going to know about this technique. So, and in fact, they called their child Hope. And now she, and her partner, they go, well, maybe something that came from our loss was that someone else now won't, because, someone who might have even died in childbirth or whatever it might be, that they've now got this technique. And that, to share that story, for someone to think, oh, you know what, that bloke we've just seen larking about and reading from Moomin's books and books about giant killer crabs and whatever else, we can tell him his story and we want to share it. And that's what that bit of, sometimes where it's like when people sometimes come up, and I had a thing when I was in, I think it was Lowestoft, and I was doing quite a late night gig, and a couple waited till late on, so I was chatting to people, and then they kind of came over last, and they said, I just want to say, and he said, I've never heard my brain on stage before, because when people see, because it's quite a manic kind of thing, what I do, it's been really interesting to find out that people have heard their own brain, the brain they've hidden, the mind they've hidden. And he started crying. And it was like, and that realising how many people are going through life hiding who they are, which is agonising, thinking they're insane or that they're not right, and then seeing someone or hearing someone or whatever it might be and going, I'm not the only one. That, to realise how much, in one way, it's given me a kind of, not exactly a messianic zeal, but it really, I really do want people to, that moment of someone feeling comfortable enough, or even they don't have to come up. Maybe they just afterwards they go, I'm all right. That is to me a really important part of what performance can be, which is empathy.
We often inquire about an individual's rock bottom moment on this podcast. Not to dwell on the lowest points, but because we found that the narrative leading up to these moments can be both inspiring and offer hope to our listeners. Have there been any personal or professional low points in your life? And if so, could you describe the journey and growth that followed, offering a metaphorical olive branch of encouragement to our audience?
It's a weird one, that one, because I think, there's a point where I know a lot of things kind of unravelled, which was just before my 3rd birthday, because I was in a car crash. There was a car on the wrong side of the road at speed. My mum was nearly killed, and then she suffered from depression for much of the rest of her life. She was a very good mum, but she also, there's a great moment in, have you seen the Australian TV series Mr. In Between?
No.
It's fantastic. It's really, really great. And there's a scene in one of the episodes where the guy who's he sometimes works as a hitman and stuff like that, but there's a very interesting moral, you can see he's an ex-soldier, and you can see that a lot of the stuff he does, he just still views as if, well, this is what happens with the enemy or whatever, but you can see he's also, his brother has got a motor neuron disease, he looks after his daughter quite a lot. You can see there's a real humanity in him. But he never got on with his dad, and his dad gets dementia. And he goes into the home one day, and his dad goes, hi, son. And he goes, oh, you recognise me today, Dad? He goes, yeah, I'm having a good day. I need to have a word with you. And then they sit down, they start talking. And his dad tells him about when he was sent out as an Australian soldier to Vietnam. And at the end of it, he just says, I wish you'd known me before I'd gone to war. And I think that is such a huge part of so many people's stories, which is, there is a point in which so much of their potential is lost. Like when you're talking about abuse, and I think of the number of narratives of that, and the number of people that I've known who've had that, there are these things that happen, which can mean that they've gone to war. Sometimes it's a literal war, and sometimes, and so I kind of think that I don't have any, there's certainly been moments of, when I've suddenly just really hated myself so intensely. And if I remember once doing the fruit market in Hull, and just the negative voice was so loud at the end of the gig. And I just went backstage and I just burst into tears, which is quite an unusual, it's not that I'm generally someone who, there's that annoying thing, isn't it? Which is, though I have no problem with other people crying whatsoever, there's an internal shame to the, but I would have moments like that, and I would have moments where sometimes where I would do something wrong, you know, even things like leaving the keys in the door overnight by mistake, and your partner goes, "Why have you done that?" And that just would crash in on me, and I'd have to just walk and just, you know, and not know what I was going to do, and just feel utterly powerless. And so I'd have lots of kind of moments like that. But I think a lot of those things come from the fact that I thought I'd caused the car crash because I was nearly three, and so you think if you do something, you know, when you're a kid, if you pick up a cup and a vase falls over there, you often think it's all entangled and you've caused it. Yeah. So I think that had a major effect on me, and probably I think on all our family, and that was one of those things that I think I battled with a lot, and why I'm so worried very often about people's happiness is because I remember, like, when my mum would sometimes get very, very upset, and this is such a cliche of comedian story, but I would go up to her bedroom as she was kind of screaming, and I would try and make her happy and check she was okay from a very early age. And I think that had quite an effect on me. So I think, I can't nail it down to a certain moment. It's more a kind of the hum that was around. And
that's interesting. Why is that a cliche with comedians, the sort of that story?
It's that creation myth, you know, that moment of something there's quite a few. It is higher than average, for instance, the number of comedians who've lost a parent. You know, Alan Davis and Eddie Izzard, there's quite a high amount of kind of adoption and things like that. Of course, there's an enormous number of people who don't become comedians who've been adopted and lost a parent or whatever. But it is slightly, but it's like, so it's just that, you know, that there's always that love, isn't there, of going, he made the whole world laugh, but he himself was in tears.
Tears of the clowns.
And it is. And I think that Spike Milligan talked about that. He said that the reason that people obsess about that is because of the clash of the fact that there's someone making everyone laugh, but actually they're deeply sad. But actually, I think I wrote a book called I'm a Joker, So Are You, and in that, one of the things I wanted to say was that a lot of the cliches about comics are actually true of an enormous number of people. If anything, I think one of the things that I find remarkable is like when Robin Williams, one of the reasons I wrote the book was
Robin Williams,
because I remember that the night that we found out that he'd taken his own life, I was actually doing a show about mental health and comedy, and came off stage in the interval and then found out about that, and then I saw so many cliche-ridden articles about him. And of course, one of the things about him is, you know, comedy might have actually been the mechanism that got him further through life than, you know, it wasn't. I think it's an incredible thing when you think of the number of comics around the UK on any given night who might have just gone on stage and died on their arse, and now they're in a budget hotel. And they're just thinking, all they're thinking is that and the fact that there are not more comedians, I think the truth of it is, it seems amazing the resilience to keep going back, but we really notice it because it seems like such a clash.
Have you ever died on your ass in front of a audience?
Oh, yeah. God, you know.
Tell me about that.
Do you know what? I think if you haven't died on your arse, you're not putting the effort in. I think that's the whole point, is like, if every single night you're always storming it. Every comic that I really admire, I've seen have a bad night. You know, and it's like, and sometimes, like, there's a brilliant comic called Paul Foot, and I don't know if you know Paul, but Paul won, there used to be 3 new act competitions in Edinburgh, and he won 2 out of the 3, and the other one was won by Peter Kay. And then Paul was immediately promoted he had a brilliant 10 minutes, but he didn't have half an hour. So suddenly he started dying on his arse, but no one died better than him. In fact, sometimes you didn't want him to die. I'd love him to have a great gig, but you just go, but no one does it with such aplomb and so beautifully and seems to be in such control. And, but yeah, I think if you're being, it's like, the best encore that I've ever experienced was at a Manchester club called the Frog and Bucket, because one table was still booing me. And then you go, I'm still art. Yeah. They loved me, but some still despise me. So I think I've had plenty of gigs. And also, of course, one of the things that I think I would, when I was failing quite often, was because I was so worried that I wasn't doing comedy right. When in fact, like I remember when I used to do the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in the early days, I quite often, you know, you'd play these venues where you thought, God, this is a lot to pay for a ticket for an hour-long show. And you'd be so worried about whether you're giving value for money. And that worrying voice actually meant you didn't give a better show. So that's why I started doing the free Fringe for a while, because I was doing gigs for free. So in one way, it's like, well, they've not put any money in, but it doesn't make you do a worse gig, because you still want them to have a great time. Yeah. And so, yeah, I think, at the time that you're dying on your arse, you don't think you're learning anything from it. But I think the thing you should be learning should not be about becoming bulletproof. It should be about having the confidence to die on your arse and go. I remember with Stuart Lee years ago, comedian Stuart Lee, and I had a bad gig, and he went, "Yeah, but would you want to have a drink with any of those people?" And sometimes you can look at an audience, you think you can be the beloved entertainer who wants to be loved by everyone. But if you're loved by everyone, are you actually saying anything? Because, some nights, I remember doing a gig, I think this was one of my really big learning things after I'd done my first solo tour, and then I got booked for this club in the West End of London, and even the music that was playing at the beginning, I was like, oh, this doesn't sound like it's setting up for the right kind of thing that I do. And I thought, oh, do you know what, I could go back to a lot of old routines that I've got that I know will kind of cut through this crowd. And then I suddenly thought, what if, out of the 200 people here, 4 people have specifically booked, they've gone, oh, I've seen Robin before, we saw a solo show. And then I go and do a hack set, and they leave and they go, oh, that wasn't really what we thought he did. So I really dug my heels in, and I thought, no, I'm going to do what I want to do. And at the end, it all worked. But there was one table that didn't like me, and it turned out that earlier on in the evening, it'd be found out that they were voters for the British National Party. So I wasn't that bothered that I hadn't won over the fascists, But that bit of going, hang on a minute, what if someone is, they really were? And that moment when you say something that, when you are not just going, what makes people laugh? Then the moment that you're restricting yourself by a lot of cliches. It's an important thing to talk to people who don't have the same opinions as you, but not necessarily those who've monetised them. And I've said some comment about when Lawrence Fox, in a very candid way, set fire to those pride flags in his back garden. I just put up something about that. And then apparently Lawrence Fox got in contact, was like, well, I think we should have a discussion. I'm like, no, there's nothing, but I will have, you look on things like, with the trans issue that has become, so toxic. And I think the anti-trans movement, I personally believe, is hugely overrepresented. Is because I travel around a lot and I talk to a lot of people in a lot of towns, a lot of cities. But sometimes I meet people who I don't think they're not actively anti-trans. They've read lots of stories that are in the newspaper in the same way with Section 28 when homophobia was being stirred up. And they believed those stories. But it's not because they actually, and so you can end up talking to them, and they can go, oh, so that story in that paper, so that's not exactly what happened. No, if you read the full actual thing, this is what happened before that moment. And so I think it's working out who to be open to have a discussion with, and who, where you go, like with climate change deniers as well and people like that, you just go, no, this person is just fully committed to this particular cause, and they have no interest in knowing any other details or any other facts apart from those which are
it's just important to be right, isn't it? It doesn't matter what, I've said this before, it doesn't matter what evidence you provide to somebody, it's they need to be right, and often it's about who shouts the loudest. It feels like that's what makes it right as well, and it's ridiculous, isn't it? So,
well, I get quite a lot, like I get these people who say, why don't you listen to the women? And I go, well, I'm listening to my friend Carolyn, who, when I was 18, introduced me to the first books on feminism that I read. I'm listening to my friend Josie, and I'm listening to my friend who's been a feminist activist for years and fought for abortion rights in Ireland, and I'm listening to my wife, and I'll go through all of these things, and they go, no, but just because they're friends doesn't mean they're right. And you go, well, hang on a minute, I'm listening to a lot of women that I hugely respect, and who are also people who've been feminist activists through their whole life, but somehow now not those ones. And that's when you realise, well, that's no point in talking to those people, because they're just saying, well, when I say listen, I don't mean those women. Because I think I got that part, but didn't get that actual question. Oh no, I think you've got to now. It's like once you put your head above the parapet, you're gonna, and it's and I understand why a lot of people stay silent, but it's like, I think,
that's kind of where I am with a lot of things. Sometimes I'll see things, I'll go, you know what? It's more about engaging in arguments online. I look at it, I was like, I could comment on this, I could argue this point, but then it's 7 o'clock now, and I know if I do, that's my entire evening gone.
Well, it's that cartoon, isn't it? I'll be with you in a moment, darling, but I've just found out someone else is wrong on the internet. That thing is just not, and it's like, Twitter or whatever it is now. That is just, it's a cesspit if you get involved in those things. I don't really use it very much. My friend kind of looks after my account, but I find as long as you're just putting up nice things, there's loads of people I engage with who are lovely.
Yeah.
But if you fall into, those kind of people who've got their, whatever it is, the search thing, which means if a certain term comes up, they leap on it.
Yeah.
That's wasted time. And it's not, you can do so much better things, better things.
One of my friends has set up a separate account to troll. Bear in mind, he is very much a left-leaning supporter, on his actual account. He's always, against the Tories and stuff like that. But he's created a separate account just to have fun arguing with people. So Jeremy Corbyn posted something the other day, and he just replied with a comment that was, very anti sort of Labour policies, and the amount of people jumped on him, and he's engaged in all these arguments, and I just messaged him, why do you do this? He went, I don't know. He said, I just found it really funny to argue with people who have the same political opinions as me.
Yeah, years ago, in the kind of earlier days of the internet, there was a mate of mine that used to go on gun rights forums in America, and just start talking about guns, and then getting overly flirtatious with the other men, and then seeing them get really angry and homophobic, and it gave him a kick. Whereas I now, I would consider all of that, for me, is wasted time.
Of course, yeah. Well, that's what I would going back to it of wasting time. Like, I mean, I couldn't argue with people about things that I am actually for, let alone arguing with the same people that have similar opinions to me just for a laugh. I'm like, what are you doing? You have a family,
Yeah.
What is this about? I'm going to go back to my questions though, Robin. So, books have been a significant part of your life, and you visited hundreds of independent bookshops as part of your Bibliomaniac tour, including Julie Ellam's J Books in Hull. Out of service, we have a library for people in addiction in memory of Alex. Alex was one of our service users. He was a homeless chap, actually. Always saw him with a book. Every time you saw him on the street, he always had his head in his book. I remember before talking about Game of Thrones to him, and he was really interested. I'd really like to read that. So one of our colleagues actually went out and bought the entire Game of Thrones series, and we're just giving him one at a time, sort of thing. But you've mentioned music and comedy, where your entrances into addies of social justice, they were what transported a middle-class home counties boy into the experiences of others. Do you believe that literature can have a similar impact, especially for individuals dealing with addiction? And if so, can you elaborate on how books and reading can bridge understanding and empathy?
Well, it is that thing of a weapon of empathy, that if so much of what we see with, well, for instance, people in prison, addicts, the way it's written about, people with addiction generally, like there's a dehumanisation, there's it's like if you read, whenever you read the column in the back of the big issue, which is, the big issue seller's kind of story, is that bit where you go, hang on a minute, that happened in my life and that happened in my life, but there was a safety net, and in the same way, it's like sometimes when I think about addiction, and I think of some of the people who in showbiz who are quite wealthy, who come from wealthy backgrounds. And I think that is sometimes a safety net. So it's that kind of moment where they go, oh dear, I think you've had a little bit too much cocaine recently. I think you better go to the Priory. And then other people who've kind of made it into showbiz but don't come from, a background with a safety net, sometimes when things start to fade, they, don't get those people saying, right, we now need to leave. So and we see it in sport a lot as well, I think, So I think it's really important to hear as many different voices as possible, to find, one of the things that can happen when people are reading a book is they can find, again, they're not the only one. They can hear a voice that is like their voice, or you're reading a book about a group that you're not part of. And you go, oh, hang on a minute. But I thought these people, because so much of our media turns every person into two dimensions, a two-dimensional cliche. You have to find a way to reinflate those people to three dimensions. And that is, I think, when you can read a book and you can just go, oh, right, this is, when you read an autobiography of someone who's been through different forms of hell, and you start to notice the similarities, is a very, very important thing, because I think that empathy, it was interesting where there's a friend of mine, Alistair, who works in prisons, and he wrote a book called The Sentence. And the sentence, he'd found out that a lot of people who'd slipped through the education net as well. So, people in prison who'd never really learned to read. And he found out that they didn't they found sometimes longer words difficult, and they found punctuation difficult. So he wrote a book that was just one sentence. And it was about a prison sentence, and it was also a dystopian thing. And it was all just single syllable words, no punctuation at all. And it was really interesting when he would tell me the stories about people who had sweat through that book and then suddenly realised, because people are so scared of failing, if you're given a book that you can't really read, then you might just go, I can't read. And you would, rather than try and learn, you'd just go, I'm just going to leave that entirely. And I think that, when I've been in prisons and I've, listened to people's poetry and things like that, the weapon that they've been given, because that's part of the weapon as well with words. It's not just reading books. It's learning how to just order your thoughts sometimes on a page to start, never be scared, get rid of the critical voice. If you want to start writing something, just write it, just keep writing and don't worry about, I think sometimes one of the sad things that can happen in school is that someone writes a wonderful story, but their punctuation is terrible and their grammar and all of those things. And so what they get back is something with a lot of red marks on it. So even though it might say this is a wonderful story, but still what you're mainly seeing is your mistakes. And to prioritise the imagination and go, do you know what? This is a brilliant story. That's the most important thing. Like I was telling an audience the other day, there was some kids in, I said, I'm not very good at punctuation because I normally put a comma where I'd pause, which means I don't use commas. And I said, but the thing is now I'm actually a published author. Someone else does the punctuation for me. I send in the thing, and so it doesn't matter. So some of those things that we prioritise, some of the rules we prioritise are not the most important part. And I do think when someone starts to think, because I think everyone has stories. I don't think I've met anyone who doesn't, when sometimes people say, oh, you mentioned about writing, but I don't really have a story. And then I'll sit with them and start chatting. And then I'll go, that's a story. It's just become mundane because you've carried it in your head for so long. So that ability to write out your story and then look at it is so different to just playing it through your head. Like when I was saying about the car crash that I was in, when I finally wrote about it when I was 48 years old, I think, I didn't even want to put it in the book. I thought it was a boring and stupid story and a waste of time. But suddenly it made me face up to that blame that I felt. And then I think by writing it, also some of the rest of my family, we were able to start to talk about something. Because suddenly it wasn't just a conversation, it was in print. And you can look at those words and you can kind of just interrogate those words. So I think it's not just reading books, but writing yourself is a really important thing. And to hell with spelling and to hell with punctuation initially, first of all, just get your thoughts out so you can understand them on the page. And then maybe if they go further, then someone else can go, well, hang on a minute, I'll tell you what, we'll reorder this so someone gets that meaning and that meaning.
To be fair, it's kind of what this whole podcast is about, is the ethos that everybody has a story to tell. And going to what you were saying then about putting words to a page, that's part of getting some of the guests that we've had on here with lived experience of substance misuse, of addiction, of a lifetime of just such negativity. Having this medium there where we just talk about it for other people to then listen to. People come away from this podcast thinking, do you know what? I feel like a weight has just been lifted off my shoulder. Do you know, because we had a local boxer on, Tommy Coyle, and he said it was like therapy for him. They said it's honest, it's like talking to a therapist doing this, because it's just having that story and then having someone to bounce off and being asked the questions of that story as well, which just elaborates everything further.
Well, yeah, talking honestly is something that we're so worried about social shame so much of the time that we don't talk honestly. And, it's like a few years ago, I was out in Adelaide in Australia and I became friendly with this former head teacher. And one night, I was chatting to her and she said, you need to do stand-up about suicide. And I
Which them two things, you just think stand-up and suicide. How are they going to go together?
And it turned out that her daughter had taken her life and she felt that if it was just out there, just something you could bring up, not in the official, not in the corridors, not in the psychiatric ward, not that, just something that people could say. And I remember it's probably the hardest I've ever worked on a routine, because even though most of the time I just improvise stuff, this was one where I thought, I can't put a step wrong here, because this is such a...
Got to be right.
And I remember, the conversations that I had afterwards, every time I did it in the show, and the fact that, again, by talking about it on stage, people then have permission to talk about it with you when you come off stage. And that bit of just, when someone can honestly talk and not go, it's that, sometimes if you sometimes go, oh, do you know what, I can't say that out loud because all my friends will go, oh, idiot, I can't believe you said that. And I go, don't change yourself, change your friends. Yeah. Because more often than not, there will be a moment, and I'm sure you've had that, I'm sure everyone in this room's had that thing where you suddenly let something out and you think, oh God, I don't know if I should have said that. And then someone else leans forward and goes, God, that's really interesting because I had that thing. And that bit of masking everything, that's where so much unhappiness comes from.
Absolutely. Comedy, speaking of which, can be a powerful medium for addressing societal changes. Can you share an example of a moment where comedy helped break down barriers and challenge stereotypes related to issues like addiction or homelessness, much like you have there with suicide?
Well, I think it's that bit where there's more and more shows that have been going on where people have talked about sometimes drug addiction, sometimes alcoholism, and there's a big change I think that happened. I think it is a big change in stand-up. Is if you look at the old history of comedy, like the 50s, 60s, 70s, there's a lot of stories of comics who were hiding who they were by doing comedy. And then now in the 21st century, there's lots of comics like, someone like Hannah Gadsby, who her show Nanette dealt with, abuse and violence. And that was, it was like rather than her going to the stage to hide herself, she was going to the stage to reveal all of this stuff that might not have got out in the rest of life. Yeah. And so I think, when you see shows like that, and when you see some of those comedians who have talked to, because there's, again, obviously comedy, you've got a lot of kind of addictive personalities in comedy, and there'll be a certain point where some people manage to kind of, just crush those impulses. And then when they talk about some of the, when you look at Robin Williams, the way that he would talk about Coke and what that did to him. And and he was drinking heavily then, and then when the comedian John Belushi died, taking a mix of heroin and cocaine, I think that was the start of him going, hang on a minute, I've got to change. And so I think it gave him some control to also turn it into stand-up, because it's that bit again that if you can turn something into a story, then it gives you. It's like during grief and things like that. If something happened, like at the moment I'm talking sometimes about my dad's death because he died a few months ago. And I tell the story of on the final night, the final day when he was unconscious, we all sat round the bed and read Tarka the Otter, which was his favourite book by Henry Williamson to him. And there's a whole story that I tell around that, which allows me, it now has structure. So it's not as chaotic as just dealing with grief. It's you can put a little frame around it, and it allows you every single night to talk, if you want to, and you don't have to every night. I don't do it every night. It will depend on the evening, to sometimes talk about a big loss, but with a level of, because I think that's one of the problems, a bit like with the ADHD thing as well, and lots of other ideas, which is the world can seem so chaotic. And if you can find a way of boxing it in a little bit, so like the chaos of my mind is still the chaos of my mind, but now I've got a frame around it, which is this understanding of the ADHD mind. So as chaotic as it is, it will eventually, the chaos hits some walls and starts to bounce back. But until you have that, in the same way as the framework of understanding other people's addiction and once you've got a framework around it, sometimes you go, hang on a minute, those stories have now given something to bounce off, whether they're your stories or whether they're other people's stories.
Yeah, no, that's really good, that. Obviously, comedy often addresses societal issues with humour. How do you navigate the fine line between using comedy as a tool to challenge stigmas and ensuring that sensitive topics are approached with empathy and understanding? I imagine doing what you've been doing with suicide is very much part of that. So how do you really do that then?
It's not as, I don't now find it as difficult as I would have done, because again, it's that, I think it's that bit of honesty. It's that bit of going, well, first of all, it's the bit where you go, do you know what, the most important thing is not necessarily sometimes the size of the laugh. It's about something that gets underestimated, I think, is fascination. Like when I first started doing things that could sometimes be longer pieces, and I sometimes think, oh, there's no joke there yet. Yeah. And then I'd look at the audience and go, they're leaning in. So they're interested. This is something that is very, far too much of our kind of light entertainment is about people going, whee, 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 and then actually not receiving anything. They're just whooping and cheering. And a lot of the comedy clubs, I go and see people and they made the audience make a lot of noise, not necessarily even laughter, just woo, cheer, hey, who's from there, who's from there? But that actual bit where you go, oh, there's now a quiet, like I've talked about this before, about the 3 cough rule, that if I'm talking about something and I think, oh, I hope is it all right to talk about this? And then one person coughs, I'll kind of be, well, it's autumn. People are getting a cough now. If someone immediately coughs afterwards, I think, well, no, I mean, there is a cough going around, but that now is the warning cough. Did that cough come because that person coughed over there? If there's a third cough immediately after that, I realise if everyone's noticing the tickle in their throat now, this means that they've lost concentration in me. So I now need to change the energy or find a punchline from wherever I can or do something that startles them back into concentration.
And how easy is that to do then?
Again, I think a lot of it is it's not as if it's not something you've clinically learned. You've learned by doing something for years. I mean, it's a really fascinating thing when I look back now and I think, why wasn't I able to do some of the things that I can do now in stand-up? And one of the things is, well, I've done thousands upon thousands of gigs in so many different locations. And so I'm not consciously thinking most of the time on stage. I'm just allowing the connect. But then if there is a moment where I start to go, hang on a minute, I don't think this is a good enough story. And now, because it's not an anxiety fear, it's now I think it is a performer just going, nah, that wasn't good enough. Let's do something else now. Yeah. But it's again, much like when you were talking about wrestling. I would imagine, the first time that you were dealing with trying to be instinctual, you just think, oh God, I've really screwed that up, and that was I think I hurt him more than I was meant to there, or you got hurt more than you went to. It's like I remember once being in a play where we'd improvised this fight, and we hadn't realised how much we had actually now got an innate sense of how the fight worked, even though it felt improvised, and I just slipped very slightly further back than I should have done, and that meant that when the woman came to headbutt me, she did actually connect with my nose, and it broke my nose, because that slight movement out of place, we actually did know, we had choreographed it without choreographing it, and then one slip.
That's it.
And a broken nose.
It obviously relates to that completely. You've got to be in the right position at the right time, and if you're not, that's when injuries are going to occur. You played the unforgettable role of Stuart Foote in The Office, often regarded as one of the greatest British sitcoms ever. It's worth noting that your collaboration...
Change that to often considered to be one of the greatest performances in a British sitcom. Let's make it about me.
Absolutely. Often regarded as one of the greatest performances in a British sitcom ever. It's worth noting that your collaboration with Ricky Gervais extended beyond The Office as you supported him on his stand-up tour. Can you take us through the experience of being friends with the world's highest grossing comedian and, additionally, given Ricky's reputation for practical jokes screaming in your ear, how does it feel to have had millions of people on YouTube right now see him be ever so endearing to you?
It's such an it's a very odd experience, because one of the things that I found, because I knew Ricky Gervais from the early 90s, so long before he became famous, and one of the things that you don't notice is when a friend of yours becomes very, very famous. And it's suddenly you go, oh, hang on a minute. It was very useful when he became famous, because he used to walk down the street screaming at me and making stupid faces and grabbing my arm. And then, of course, once he became famous, people would notice if he was making a show of himself and the pavement. And they'd go, "Oi, Ricky, do the dance." And he'd go, "Bloody hell, get us out of here, get us out of here." But it was really wearing. It was because he has a very, a short attention span, and he loves making other people embarrassed. It's his favourite thing. So, the Living with Ricky DVD extra from, I forget, it was Fame, I think it was, that people sometimes go, why did you do that? Why did you let him bury you on a beach or whatever? I go, well, what you don't see in the 20-minute documentary is the month of him going, go on, I'm going to bury you in the beach, I'm going to bury you in the beach, I'm going to bury you in the beach, I'm going to bury you in the beach. So eventually, just to get half-day silence, you go, oh, bury me on the beach. And that means that then you've bought 6 hours where, one, he's tired because he's had to dig some sand, and two, he just hasn't got, it's like, and then, of course, the next day, I want to hang you upside down on the thing, I want to hang you upside down on the thing. So, yeah, it was... He's
like a giant toddler, isn't he?
Yeah. He really, he is, he demands to, control the world.
Finally, Robin, we have thousands of listeners. Can you tell us what's next and this is any opportunity for you to plug any upcoming work that you've got coming up in the coming months.
Oh, I'll probably be in a bookshop or library near you soon. And then, there's a new series of The Infinite Monkey Cage with Brian Cox, and we did one about the octopus, which is very interesting. And then it kind of really got derailed when they found out that one of the octopus's arms is a sex arm. And so, obviously, at that point, Russell Kane took us down I don't know how much that'll make the edit. The thing I found most interesting about the octopus is the fact it's got such a complex brain and consciousness and all of these things, it appears, and yet it only lives for 1 to 2 years to have such a complex brain. So we're doing a new series of that, and then I'll just keep touring around. I've got my book, I'm a Joke and So Are You, has just come out in a new edition, and Bibliomaniac's just come out in paperback, and then I'm writing something else. But I'm just always travelling around and making new things.
Well, again, Britain's most travelled and busiest comedian we've got here. We end every one of our podcasts with a series of 10 questions, not related to anything that we've spoken about so far, just to end it on a high note, because we often do talk about some depressing things on here, don't we? So it does lighten the mood a little bit. So my first question is, what is your favourite word?
Oh, I love curmudgeon. I'm a very big fan of curmudgeon.
I've never even heard of curmudgeon.
Oh, no, I know. I was told that when I did a BBC Three documentary. Curmudgeon is someone who's grouchy, but curmudgeon it's a Scrooge-ish kind of take on life, which is always curmudgeon. Look at his curmudgeonly face.
And what's your least favourite word?
Oh, it might be okay, actually. That bit of when I was saying about okay. There's something about that which, because it can be misread by me so easily.
Tell me something that excites you.
The Humber Bridge, of course, I've mentioned already.
Yes.
The fact that I'm going to go to JE Books during our lunch break, that excites me, and I'll find out what second-hand books got that I need desperately now. Finding a new badge or being given a new badge, that's a lot of fun. I like getting those. So there's a lot of things. Playing crazy golf with my son. We love Hastings, right? Hastings, you go to Hastings, seaside town of Hastings, and it's got 3 crazy golf courses. So that is a holiday complete in itself.
Tell me something that doesn't excite you.
The news media. I really I think it's the most negative thing that the UK has, is it controls so much of what is ultimately, I think, in particular the English character, even more than the British character, I think, mean, spiteful, vindictive and sneering. And I just find that's why I don't start the day. This is why we were talking early on, that's why I start the day by reading Moomins. You see, if you read the Moomins, you'll Tuva
much better day than reading the news. What sound or noise do you love?
Oh, that's an interesting one, isn't it? The cliches are things like the sea, because I do really like just that. But I do quite like when I'm at a music festival and there's a sound system in the background, and I think, how am I going to get to sleep with that noise going on? And then there's a little point where you get hypnagogic and you start to just drift off. And I really like that bit where your brain suddenly comes in tune with a quite distant sound system.
I like that. What sound or noise do you hate?
The people beeping their horns.
What is your favourite curse word?
Oh, that is arseholism. It's not really arseholism is someone who is, again, many of the people in the news media are guilty of arseholism. Yes,
I like that.
It's in a movie called Pink Flamingos.
Yes. If you wasn't doing the I suppose the many roles that you do, what profession would you like to attempt?
I don't think I've only got one choice. I think what I do is what I do. I really, I've always. I think in one way I've kind of. Oh, there we go. That's is that repetition or deviation?
In the building.
Has it though?
Has it though?
What day is it? Friday, 5 to 12. Do you know what? We can jump. We're not that high up. We're all right.
We're good. Tell me a profession that you would not like to do.
Do you know what? Anything that would involve some form of potholing or going into a very small underground space.
Fair.
Well, I'd love to be an astronaut. I'd love to go on the ISS. The opposite of that would be anything that required me scrabbling around in kind of pipes and stuff.
Perfect. And then lastly, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Well, shown you, haven't I? Oh, you're not believing for so long. I would imagine
it's just that petty.
Yeah.
Robin, you've been absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
You've been wonderful. And if you enjoyed this episode of the Believe in People podcast, don't forget to check out our other episodes and hit that subscribe button. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and TikTok. Our name is CGL Hull. That's CGLHULL. We're on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon and Google Music, so please like and subscribe to receive regular updates. You can also search for Believe in People podcast on your favourite listening device, and if you could leave us a review, that will really help us with getting our message out there and rising up the daily podcast charts.